Imagine you suffer horrific, undeniable bullying at work.
Right, like an absolute worst-case scenario.
Exactly. You take your boss to court, you have all the evidence, you're sitting there in the tribunal, and you are basically about to win a massive payout.
Because you've got them dead to rights.
Right. And then the employer's lawyers stand up, but they don't even talk about the bullying. Instead, they reveal that you, I don't know, fudged the end date of a job on your resume from 13 years ago.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and suddenly you lose everything. Your case is just dismissed. Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we are looking at how a tiny lie from your past can absolutely vaporize your legal protections in the present.
It is honestly a terrifying scenario for anyone who has ever been tempted to, embellish their credentials.
Yeah.
We tend to view employment laws as this impenetrable shield for workers, but the reality is, well, it's much more conditional than that.
Okay, let's unpack this. The sources we're diving into today come straight from the case files and legal analyses of the Australian Workplace Discrimination Representatives, or the AWDR.
All right, a major player in this space.
Huge. And for those of you listening, just for some context, this isn't some slick corporate defense firm. The AWDR has been fighting exclusively for workers' rights for over 30 years.
Yeah, they're not representing the big companies here.
Exactly. They are Australia's leading non-lawyer workplace and discrimination representatives. They support over 16,000 clients. They operate 24/7 to help everyday Australians fight against unfair dismissals, toxic workplaces, all of it. They are unequivocally in the corner of the employee.
Which, that's what makes their documentation of these specific cases so compelling, right?
Totally.
Even an organization completely dedicated to defending workers acknowledges this fundamental boundary line in employment law. Because the Fair Work Act in Australia offers incredibly robust protections.
It really does.
Yeah, it guards against unfair dismissal. It protects you from adverse action if you exercise a workplace, right, like making a safety complaint. And it provides this massive safety net. But that safety net doesn't just exist in a vacuum.
Right, there's a catch.
Exactly. It requires a foundational legal concept, which is a baseline of good faith.
See, I want to dig into that concept of good faith because it seems like the pivot point for literally everything we are talking about today. Are we just saying you have to be like a generally honest person?
Well, it's a bit more mechanical than that. In the eyes of employment law, the relationship between an employer and an employee isn't just, a transaction of labor for money.
Okay.
It is a psychological and legal contract of mutual trust and confidence. The employer trusts that you actually possess the skills you claim to have, and you trust that they will provide a safe, compliant environment.
Makes sense.
So if an employee breaches that contract of trust from day one by fabricating their background, the structural integrity of that entire relationship is just compromised.
So if the foundation is fake, the employer's legal obligations to protect you basically evaporate, which honestly perfectly sets up this 2026 case that tests exactly what happens when an employee tries to use these robust protections as a smokescreen for their own incompetence.
Of this case.
Let's look at the case of Treffry versus Bluescope Steel Ltd.
It's a classic collision of performance management and workplace protections.
It really is. So here are the mechanics of the situation for you guys listening. It's June 2024. A guy named Will Treffry is hired by Bluescope Steel. His role is talent acquisition partner.
Right, which sounds fancy, but it's very specific.
Exactly. For anyone unfamiliar with corporate HR structures, this is an internal recruiter. Your entire day is spent managing job postings on software, screening candidates, coordinating interviews via email.
It's a highly administrative, computer-heavy role. You cannot do that job without a high degree of technological fluency and organizational skill.
Absolutely. Well, Treffry starts the job, and almost immediately his manager, Kim Mitchell, starts documenting some pretty severe red flags.
Red flags is putting it mildly.
Right. Within his first few days, he casually tells her that he has a, quote, really bad memory.
Not great for an admin role.
Not at all. Then, he appears highly reluctant to even use his computer without someone physically standing there helping him. By week 2, he is failing to action basic authority to hire requests within the required time frame.
Which is the core part of his job. And from a management perspective, Mitchell is doing exactly what she is supposed to do here. She is documenting a clear failure of a probationary employee to meet the core competencies of the job they were explicitly hired for.
Yeah, they have to put him on weekly check-in meetings, and eventually he is just pulled off an urgent recruitment campaign entirely because he's too slow.
Wow.
So September rolls around. Mitchell calls him into a meeting to discuss all these ongoing complaints about his attention to detail and his speed, and she makes the call that his employment should not continue past probation.
Standard procedure for someone feeling probation.
You would think. Now here's the twist. 5 days after this negative performance meeting, Treffry suddenly lodges a formal bullying complaint against her.
Just 5 days later.
Yep. He claims he's being subjected to unfair standards and repeated baseless criticism, and states that her management style caused a nervous breakdown, making him unfit to work.
It's quite the coincidence.
I know. It feels very much like pulling the fire alarm to get out of a math test, doesn't it? Like, you know you're failing, so you trigger a systemic emergency to halt the grading process. But shouldn't a formal bullying complaint freeze a firing regardless of performance?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, you are hitting on the exact crux of a general protections claim. Under the Fair Work Act, an employer is strictly prohibited from taking adverse action, which includes terminating employment because an employee exercised a workplace right.
And lodging a bullying complaint is a workplace right.
Exactly. It's a protected right. So Treffry's legal strategy was to argue that he was fired as retaliation for pulling that alarm.
But wait, let's deduce the timeline here. If the manager, Kim Mitchell, had already held the performance meeting and decided to fail him on his probation before he ever filed the complaint, the timeline actually works entirely against him, right? Right. It makes his bullying complaint look like retaliation against her, not the other way around.
And that's precisely how the Federal Circuit and Family Court analyzed the sequence of events. The court found Kim Mitchell to be a highly credible witness.
Because she had all the receipts.
She really did. They accepted her documentation, proving she was the sole decision-maker and that her mind was totally made up regarding his termination well before the bullying complaint materialized. The judge didn't view Treffry's complaint as a genuine cry for help. It was categorized as an active, strategic attempt to muddy the waters and deflect criticism away from his severe underperformance.
Now, the AWDR case file highlights a deeply sensitive complication in this timeline that adds a lot of nuance to how the court views employer behavior. Because during this exact same period of poor performance, Treffry's brother tragically died by suicide.
Yeah, which is just awful.
It is. And Bluescope Steel, the company, asked Treffry to provide documentary evidence of the death to support his request for compassionate leave.
Which, I mean, that is an incredibly fraught demand to make of a grieving employee.
Totally. Treffry argued that this request caused him immense distress, though he did actually provide a statutory declaration. And just to quickly clarify for you listening, a statutory declaration isn't just a casual note. It is a formal, legally binding oath on paper where lying is literally a criminal offense.
Right, it's a serious legal document.
So he provides this document. Did the court look at the employer's demand for proof of a suicide and decide they had crossed a legal line that invalidated the firing?
Well, they recognized the harshness of it, but they applied a very strict legal distinction. The court explicitly noted that asking for evidence of his brother's suicide could be described as insensitive.
Insensitive is an understatement.
Yeah. But being morally insensitive is not the same as acting unlawfully in the context of an employment dismissal. The legal test is about causation. Did the insensitive request play a part in the decision to fire him? The court ruled it did not.
Wow.
The dismissal was strictly, demonstrably about his inability to do the talent acquisition job.
That separation of moral empathy and legal causation is fascinating. But there is another massive systemic reason why the judge heavily favored the employer's testimony over Treffry's.
Oh, the past comes back to bite him.
Big time. This is where we move from the timeline of the dismissal to the specific skeletons in Treffry's closet, because his past absolutely destroyed his credibility in court.
We have to remember that in any tribunal or courtroom, when documentary evidence is contested, credibility is the ultimate currency. If you are bankrupt in credibility, you cannot win a he said, she said dispute. The judge simply will not buy what you are selling.
And Treffry's credibility was deeply structurally bankrupt. During cross-examination, Bluescope's lawyers pulled up a previous Fair Work Commission case from 2013.
13 years prior.
13 years prior to this dispute. In that older case, Treffry had brought an unfair dismissal claim against a totally different employer. And the official public record from that 2013 case showed that Treffry had lied to his boss about damaging his passport after a fall while hiking in China.
It's just such a bizarre lie.
I know. He fabricated an elaborate international passport emergency just to excuse his absence from work.
Creating a fictional international incident to cover up an absence shows a highly specific propensity for deceptive elaboration. It is not a simple mistake, it's a constructed alternate reality.
And he didn't leave that behavior in 2013. In this 2026 Bluescope case, under the pressure of cross-examination, he was forced to admit that he had deliberately embellished his current CV.
Shocking.
Right. He confessed to extending the employment dates at a previous job specifically to hide a period where he was unemployed.
And that admission is the fatal blow to his entire legal strategy. Because of these past lies the fake China hiking accident on the public record, combined with the falsified resume dates in the present. The court explicitly stated that Treffry's evidence had to be treated with a considerable degree of skepticism.
Yeah, they didn't believe a word he said.
Not at all. And this illustrates a vital, unbending rule of employment law. A lie to a past employer or a lie on a resume is not a localized, temporary risk that fades over time. It enters the permanent record. It forever damages your credibility as a witness.
So Treffry's lies were mostly about covering up his absences and hiding gaps in his employment history, right? It was defensive lying.
Right.
But that raises a much scarier question. What if the lie isn't just a cover-up? What if the lie is the very reason you were hired for the job in the first place? Here's where it gets really interesting, because we are escalating from a tweak CV to outright jaw-dropping fraud.
Oh yeah, we're looking at the 2025 case of McLennan versus the Industrial Relations Secretary, litigated on behalf of the New South Wales State Emergency Service, or the SES.
Let's look at the audacity of Scott McLennan. In 2022 and 2023, he secures high-level critical jobs within the New South Wales SES, eventually rising to the rank of Deputy Zone Commander.
Which is high-stakes disaster management.
Exactly. But McLennan had a secret past over on the other side of the country. In 2019, he was convicted in a Western Australian magistrate's court for posing as a registered nurse.
And we need to be really clear about the severity here. He wasn't just casually using the title on LinkedIn. He was actively practicing without a license.
He was the general manager of a cosmetic clinic in Fremantle. He was personally administering Botox, dermal fillers, and chemical peels to actual patients.
Unbelievable.
When a friend hired him for the clinic, he looked them in the eye and said he had been in the nursing industry for 20 to 30 years.
Just completely made up.
Completely. The National Health Regulator eventually caught him. He was forced to admit he had never finished any nursing qualification, and the magistrate slapped him with a $15,000 fine and $4,000 in legal costs.
So the timeline shows a convicted fraudster who pays his fines, relocates across the country to New South Wales, and immediately begins applying for high-stakes emergency management roles.
And how does a guy with a fraud conviction secure a job as a deputy zone commander? By submitting a CV that is entirely a work of fiction.
Entirely.
He lists two very specific, very impressive credentials on his resume. He claimed he held a 2005 Master of Business Administration and Management from Monash University and a 1998 Bachelor of Nursing from the University of Sydney.
And just to spoil the surprise, neither of those degrees existed. When the SES eventually pulled his academic transcripts during their investigation, the record showed he had enrolled in a handful of undergraduate psychology and marketing units at Monash years prior, and he actually failed 2 of them.
Oh my God.
He has 0 nursing credits. That was the absolute extent of his higher education.
But the fake degrees work. He gets the jobs. He even signs a formal, legally binding declaration stating his qualifications are genuine when he accepts the Deputy Zone Commander role in 2023. He builds a completely new life on this fabricated foundation.
But the digital footprint always catches up.
It always does. In May 2025, a journalist from the Australian newspaper connects the dots. They publish a massive investigative article exposing him, literally branding him a convicted fraudster who has somehow infiltrated a state disaster service.
Yeah, and the public exposure forces the hand of the SES. It triggers an immediate internal investigation. They suspend him and demand that he produce the physical evidence of his University of Sydney nursing degree.
Which he obviously can't do.
Right, when he cannot produce a degree that doesn't exist, they dismiss him for serious misconduct and dishonesty.
But McLennan doesn't just walk away and accept defeat. This is the craziest part. He actually appeals his dismissal to the New South Wales Industrial Relations Commission. He demands his job back. And his legal defense, it takes a level of delusion that is hard to comprehend.
His core argument before the commission was that he wasn't acting dishonestly. He was simply careless in how he formatted his CV.
Careless. Let me break down his exact argument for you guys. He told the commission that he placed the Monash MBA and the Sydney nursing degree under a heading on his resume that said education, rather than a heading that said qualifications.
A very convenient distinction.
Right. Therefore, in his mind, he wasn't technically claiming he had graduated, he was just noting he had been educated there. He also claimed he suffered a genuine memory lapse about his university days, believing he had actually completed postgraduate subjects for an MBA rather than failing undergraduate psychology.
A memory lapse about a whole master's degree.
I mean, think about your own resume for a second. You've probably been in a position where you were tempted to stretch a start date by a month or two to hide a gap. I can understand fudging a month or two, but how do you accidentally claim you have a nursing degree and a master's in business? That is not a memory lapse, that's writing fiction.
What's fascinating here is that the commission completely agreed with that sentiment. They didn't just reject his education versus qualifications defense, they dismantled it. The commissioner's ruling was scathing. They formally categorized his arguments as inherently implausible, internally inconsistent, and disingenuous.
Brutal.
The judge specifically pointed out the dates. McLennan assigned the year 1998 to the nursing degree and 2005 to the MBA. You do not accidentally fabricate specific graduation years for degrees you never enrolled in.
The commission saw exactly what it was, a calculated, deliberate strategy to beat out honest candidates for a highly paid government job.
Precisely. But there is a deeper psychological and legal takeaway embedded in the commission's ruling. The commissioner noted that if McLennan had made an isolated, perhaps exaggerated misstatement on his resume, and then immediately confessed and shown genuine remorse the moment the SES confronted him, the legal outcome could have been different.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the dismissal might have been considered harsh. But it was his doubling down, his continued false responses, his refusal to own the lie even during the formal investigation, and his absurd formatting defense that proved his character was fundamentally incompatible with the trust required for emergency services.
The cover-up always solidifies the crime.
Exactly.
So what does this all mean? We've analyzed a guy faking a hiking accident in China to cover a shift, and a fake nurse giving Botox before becoming an emergency commander. These are wild, extreme stories.
Very extreme.
But for you, listening right now, thinking about your own resume, your LinkedIn profile, the background checks you've passed, how does this legal machinery apply to everyday professionals navigating the job market?
It applies universally because your digital and professional footprint is entirely permanent. If we synthesize the legal advice from the AWDR's FAQ section, the reality is stark. Discrepancies on your CV don't operate on a statute of limitations. They can surface years later during totally unrelated disputes, routine workplace investigations, or even, through a random newspaper article.
So instead of thinking of a resume lie as a ticking time bomb, it's more accurate to think of it like a corrupted line of code in your computer's operating system.
That is a perfect analogy. You can boot up the computer, run your daily programs, and everything might work perfectly fine for 5, even 10 years. You might be a stellar employee, but the code is still corrupted.
Right.
And the second your career runs a high-stress diagnostic, like a routine background check for an executive promotion, an unrelated workplace dispute, or, as McLennan found out, a random journalist poking around that original corruption is triggered, and it crashes the entire system.
And the AWDR makes the legal consequences of that crash very clear. While lying on a CV isn't automatically a criminal offense for everyone, though it certainly crosses into fraud if you were posing as a medical professional, it unconditionally constitutes serious misconduct in employment law.
Absolutely.
It breaches corporate codes of conduct, it violates internal fraud policies, and most importantly, it legally justifies summary, immediate dismissal without notice or severance.
This raises an important question about the permanence of digital records and background checks. Imagine you lie about a university degree to get your foot in the door. You get the job, and you are excellent at it for a decade. 10 years down the line, a new manager comes in and subjects you to horrific, documented workplace bullying, or you face blatant discrimination based on your gender or race.
A completely legitimate grievance.
Exactly. You try to use the protections of the Fair Work Act. You take them to a tribunal seeking compensation for the trauma you've endured. The moment your employer's lawyers subpoena your personnel file, audit your background, and uncover that original 10-year-old lie, your credibility is legally destroyed. The tribunal can, and often will, rule that because your employment contract was founded on deception, your right to compensation for a genuine wrong committed against you today is entirely voided.
Your shield is stripped away because you smuggled it in under false pretenses.
That's exactly it.
We've covered a massive amount of ground today. We started by looking at the AWDR an organization that spends every waking hour fighting for the rights of workers and protecting them from toxic employers. But through their own case files, we've seen the hard limits of those rights.
The boundary lines.
Yeah, we've seen how the legal protections of the Fair Work Act evaporate if you try to game the system. Whether you are faking an international passport emergency to dodge work, pulling a legal fire alarm with a fake bullying claim to avoid a bad performance review, or injecting Botox into people's faces with a completely fabricated nursing degree, the truth eventually surfaces.
It always does.
And when it does, the legal system will not protect you from the consequences of your own deception.
The entire architecture of workplace regs relies heavily on the integrity of the people utilizing it. When you deliberately compromise your own baseline of good faith, you forfeit the heavy armor designed for those acting honestly.
But before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought to chew on. We've spent this entire time scrutinizing the worker. We've looked at how employees get punished, fired, legally dismantled, and publicly shamed for lying on their resumes. But it begs a massive question for you to mull over, one actually inspired by a headline sitting untouched right there in the AWDR source material. If an employee's lies can justify immediate dismissal. Wait. If an employee's lies can justify their professional destruction, what happens when the employer is the one who lies during the recruitment process?
Oh, right. The flip side.
Yeah. If a company fabricates the salary range, lies about the remote work policy, or fakes the financial health of the business just to get you to sign the contract, are they just dangling the carrot? And if so, where are the consequences for them?
It's a vital question about the asymmetry of power in the modern workplace.
It really is, and maybe that's a deep dive for another day. Thank you for joining us as we unpack the limits of workplace protections. Keep learning, keep questioning the information around you, and remember, make sure the foundation you build your career on is made of stone, not sand. We'll catch you next time.